Do you think that I do not understand your purpose in questioning for an hour one who knows the least while I sit by? If you understand it, then be content, returned Denethor. Pride would be the folly that disdained counsel at need. But you deal out such gifts according to your own designs. Yet the Lord of Gondor is not to be made the tool of other men's purposes, however worthy. And to him there is no purpose higher in the world, as it now stands, than the good of Gondor. And the rule of Gondor, my lord, is mine, and no other man's, unless the king should come again. Unless the king should come again, said Gandalf. Well, my lord Steward, it is your task to keep some kingdom still against that event, which few now look to see. In that task you shall have all the aid that you are pleased to ask for. But I will say this, the rule of no realm is mine, neither of Gondor nor any other, great or small. But all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. And for my part, I shall not wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish. If anything passes through this night that can still grow fair or bear fruit and flower again in days to come. For I also am a steward. Did you not know? And with that he turned and strode from the hall with Pippin running at his side. Gandalf did not look at Pippin or speak a word to him as they went. Their guide brought them from the doors of the hall, and then led them across the court of the fountain into a lane between tall buildings of stone. After several turns they came to a house close to the wall of the citadel upon the north side, not far from the shoulder that linked the hill with the mountain. Within, upon the first floor above the street, up a wide carven stair, he showed them to a fair room, light and airy, with goodly hangings of dull gold sheen unfigured. It was barely furnished, having but a small table, 2 chairs and a bench, but at either side there were curtained alcoves and well-clad beds within, with vessels and basins for washing. There were 3 high narrow windows that looked northward over the great curve of Anduin, still shrouded in mists, towards the Emyn Muil and Rauros far away. Pippin had to climb on the bench to look out over the deep stone sill. Are you angry with me, Gandalf? He said, as their guide went out and closed the door. I did the best I could. You did indeed,
said Gandalf, laughing suddenly, and he came and stood beside Pippin, putting his arm about the hobbit's shoulders and gazing out the window. Pippin glanced in some wonder at the face now close beside his own, for the sound of that laugh had been gay and merry. Yet in the wizard's face he saw at first only lines of care and sorrow, though as he looked more intently he perceived that under all there was a great joy, a fountain of mirth enough to set a kingdom laughing, were it to gush forth.
Indeed you did your best,
said the wizard,
and I hope that it may be long before you find yourself in such a tight corner again between 2 such terrible old men. Still, the Lord of Gondor learned more from you than you may have guessed, Pippin. You could not hide the fact that Boromir did not lead the company from Moria, and there was one among you of high honor, who was coming to Minas Tirith, and that he had a famous sword. Men think much about the stories of old days in Gondor, and Denethor has given long thought to the rhyme and to the words Isildur's Bane since Boromir went away. He is not as other men of his time, Pippin, and whatever be his descent from father to son, by some chance the blood of Westerness runs nearly true in him, as it does in his other son, Faramir, and yet it did not in Boromir whom he loved best. He has long sight. He can perceive, if he bends his will thither, much of what is passing in the minds of men, even those that dwell far off. It is difficult to deceive him, and dangerous to try. Remember that, for you are now sworn to his service. I do not know what put it in your head or your heart to do that, but it was well done. I did not hinder it, for generous deed should not be checked by cold counsel. It touched his heart, as well, may I say it, as pleasing his humour, and at least you are free now to move about as you will in Minas Tirith, when you are not on duty. But there is another side to it. You are at his command, and he will not forget. Be wary still.
He fell silent and sighed.
Well, no need to brood on what tomorrow may bring. For one thing, tomorrow will be certain to bring worse than today, for many days to come. And there is nothing more than I can do to help it. The board is set, and the pieces are moving. One piece that I greatly desire to find is Faramir, now the heir of Denethor. I do not think that he is in the city, but I have had no time to gather news. I must go, Pippin. I must go to this Lord's Council and learn what I can. But the enemy has the move, and he is about to open his full game. And pawns are likely to see as much of it as any. Peregrine, son of Paladin, soldier of Gondor. Sharpen your blade.
Gandalf went to the door, and there he turned.
I'm in haste, Pippin,
he said.
Do me a favor, and when you go out, even before you rest, if you are not too weary, go and find Shadowfax and see how he is housed. These people are kindly to beasts, for they are good and wise folk, but they have less skill with horses than some.
With that, Gandalf went out, and as he did so, there came the note of a clear, sweet bell ringing in the tower of the citadel. 3 strokes it rang, like silver in the air, and ceased. The 3rd hour from the rising of the sun. After a minute, Pippin went to the door and down the stair, and looked about the street. The sun was now shining warm and bright, and the towers and tall houses cast long, clear-cut shadows westward. High in the blue air, Mount Mindolluin lifted its white helm and snowy cloak. Armed men went to and fro in the ways of the city, as if going at the striking of the hour to changes of post and duty.
9 o'clock we'd call it in the Shire,
said Pippin aloud to himself.
Ooh, just the time for a nice breakfast by the open window in spring sunshine. And how I should like breakfast. Do these people ever have it, or is it over? And when do they have dinner, and where?
Presently he noticed a man, clad in black and white, coming along the narrow street from the centre of the citadel towards him. Pippin felt lonely and made up his mind to speak as the man passed, but he had no need. The man came straight up to him.
You are,
he said.
Sworn to the service of the Lord in the city. Welcome.
He held out his hand and Pippin took it.
I am named Beregond, a son of Baranor. I have no duty this morning, and I have been sent to you to teach you the passwords and to tell you some of the many things that no doubt you will wish to know. As for my part, I will learn of you also. For never before have we seen a halfling in this land, and though we have heard rumour of them, little is said of them in any tale that we know. Moreover, you are a friend of Mithrandir. Do you know him well?
Well,
said Pippin.
I have known of him all my short life, as you might say, and lately I have travelled far with him, but there is much to read in that book, and I cannot claim to have seen more than a page or 2. Yet perhaps I know him as well as any, but few. Aragorn was the only one of our company, I think, who really knew him.
Aragorn,
said Beregond.
who is he?
Stammered Pippin.
He was a man who went about with us. I think he's in Rohan now.
Ah, you've been in Rohan, I hear. There is much I would ask you of that land also, for we put much of what little hope we have in its people. But I am forgetting my errand, which was first to answer what you would ask. What would you know, Master Peregrine?
Well,
said Pippin.
if I may venture to say so, rather a burning question in my mind at present is, well, what about breakfast and all that? I mean, what are the meal times, if you understand me? And where is the dining room, if there is one? Are there inns? I looked never one could I see as we rode up, though I had been borne up by the hope of a draught of ale as soon as we came to the homes of wise and courtly men.
Beregond looked at him gravely. An old campaigner, I see, he said.
They say that men who go warring afield look ever to the next hope of food and of drink, though I am not a travelled man myself.
Then you have not yet eaten today?
Well, yes, to speak in courtesy, yes,
said Pippin.
but no more than a cup of wine and a white cake or 2 by the kindness of your lord. But he racked me for it with an hour of questions, and that is hungry work.
Beregond laughed.
At the table small men may do the greater deeds, we say, but you have broken your fast as well as any man in the citadel, and with greater honour. This is a fortress and a tower of guard, and is now in posture of war. We rise ere the sun, and take a morsel in the grey light, and go to our duties at the opening hour. But do not despair.
He laughed again, seeing the dismay in Pippin's face.
Those who have had heavy duty take somewhat to refresh their strength in the mid-morning. Then there is the luncheon, at noon or after as duties allow, and men gather from the day meal as much mirth as there still may be, about the hour of sunset. Come,
We will walk a little and then go find us some refreshment, and eat and drink on the battlement, and survey the fair morning.
One moment,
Said Pippin, blushing.
greed or hunger by your courtesy put it out of my mind, but Gandalf, Mithrandir as you call him, asked me to see to his horse, Shadowfax. A great steed of Rohan, and the apple of the king's eye, I am told, though he has given him to Mithrandir for his services. I think his new master loves the beast better than he loves many men, and if his goodwill is of any value to this city, you may treat Shadowfax with all honour, with greater kindness that you have treated this hobbit, if it's possible.
Hobbit?
That is what we call ourselves.
Said Pippin.
I'm glad to learn it.
Said Beregond.
For now I may say that strange accents do not mar fair speech, and hobbits are a fair-spoken folk. But come, you shall make me acquainted with this good horse. I love beasts, and we see them very seldom in this stony city, for my people came from the mountain vales, and before that from Ithilien. But fear not, the visit shall be short, a mere call of courtesy, and we will go thence to the butteries.
Pippin found that Shadowfax had been well housed and tended, for in the sixth circle, outside the walls of the citadel, there were some fair stables where a few swift horses were kept, hard by the lodgings of the errand riders of the Lord, messengers always ready to go at the urgent command of Denethor or his chief captains. But now all the horses and the riders were out and away. Shadowfax whinnied as Pippin entered the stable and turned his head.
Good morning,
Said Pippin.
Gandalf will come as soon as he may. He is busy, but he sends greetings. And I'm to see that all is well with you. And you resting, I hope, after your long labours.
Shadowfax tossed his head and stamped, but he allowed Beregond to handle his head gently and stroke his great flanks.
It's as if he were spoiling for a race and not newly come from a great journey.
Said Beregond.
How strong and proud he is. Where is his harness? It should be rich and fair.
Oh, none is rich and fair enough for him.
Said Pippin.
He will have none. If he will consent to bear you he does, and if not, well, no bridle, whip, or thong will tame him. Farewell, Shadowfax. Have patience. Battle is coming.
Shadowfax lifted up his head and neighed, so that the stable shook, and they covered their ears. Then they took their leave, seeing that the manger was well filled.
And now for our
Said Beregond, and he held Pippin back to the citadel and so to a door in the north side of the great tower. There they went down a long, cool stair into a wide alley lit with lamps. There were hatches in the walls at the table, and one of these was open.
This is the storehouse and the buttery of my company of the guard.
Said Beregond.
Greetings, Targon.
He called through the hatch.
It is early yet, but here is a newcomer that the Lord has taken into his service. He has ridden long and far with a tight belt and has some sore labor this morning, and he is hungry. Give us what you have.
They got there bread and butter and cheese and apples, the last of the winter store, wrinkled but sound and sweet, and a leather flagon of new-drawn ale, and wooden platters and cups. They put all into a wicker basket and climbed back into the sun. And Beregond brought Pippin to a place at the east end of the great outthrust battlement, where there was an embrasure in the walls with a stone seat beneath the sill. From there they could look out on the morning over the world. They ate and drank, and they talked now of Gondor and its ways and customs, now of the Shire and the strange countries that Pippin had seen. And ever as they talked, Beregond was more amazed, and looked with greater wonder at the hobbit, swinging his short legs as he sat on the seat, or standing tiptoe upon it to peer over the sill at the lands below.
I will not hide from you, Master Peregrine,
said Beregond.
that to us you look almost as one of our children, a lad of 9 summers or so. Yet you have endured perils and seen marvels that few of our greybeards could boast of. I thought it was the whim of our Lord to take him a noble page, after the manner of the kings of old, they say. But I see that it is not so, and you must pardon my foolishness.
I do,
said Pippin.
though you are not far wrong. I am still little more than a boy in the reckoning of my own people. It will be 4 years yet before I come of age, as they say in the Shire. But do not bother about me. Come and look and tell me what I can see.
The sun was now climbing, and the mists in the vale below had been drawn up. The last of them were floating away, just overhead, as wisps of white cloud, borne on the stiffening breeze from the east that was now flapping and tugging the flags and white standards of the citadel. Away down in the valley bottom, 5 leagues or so as the eye leaps, the great river could now be seen grey and glittering, coming out of the northwest and bending in a mighty sweep south and west again, till it was lost to view in a haze of shimmer, far beyond which lay the sea 50 leagues away. Pippin could see all the Pelennor laid out before him, dotted into the distance with farmsteads and little walls, barns and byres, but nowhere could he see any kine or other beasts. Many roads and tracks crossed the green fields, and there was much coming and going, wains moving in lines towards the great gate and others passing out. Now and again a horseman would ride up and leap from the saddle and hasten into the city. But most of the traffic went out along the chief highway, and that turned south, and then, bending swifter than the river, skirted the hills and passed soon from sight. It was wide and well paved, and along its eastern edge ran a broad green riding track, and beyond that a wall. On the ride, horsemen galloped to and fro, but all the streets seemed to be choked with great covered wains going south. But soon Pippin saw that all was in fact well ordered. The wains were moving in 3 lines, one swifter drawn by horses, another slower, great wagons with fair housings of many colours, drawn by oxen, and along the west rim of the road many smaller carts hauled by trudging men.
That is the road on the vales of Tumladen and Los Arnach and the mountain village, and then on to Lebanon,
said Beregond.
There go the last of the wains that bear away to refuge the aged, the children and the women that must go with them. They must all be gone from the gate and the road clear from a league before noon. That was the order. It is a sad necessity.
He sighed.
Few, maybe, of those now sundered will meet again. And there were always too few children in this city. But now there are none. Save some young lads that will not depart, and may find some task to do. My own son is one of them.
They fell silent for a while. Pippin gazed anxiously eastward, as if at any moment he might see thousands of orcs pouring over the fields.
What can I see there?
He asked, pointing down to the middle of the great curve of the Anduin.
Is that another city, or what is it?
It was a city,
said Beregond.
the chief city of Gondor, of which this was now only a fortress. For that is the ruin of Osgiliath on either side of the Anduin, which our enemies took and burned long ago. Yet we want it back in the days of the youth of Denethor, not to dwell in, but to hold as an outpost and rebuild the bridge for the passage of our arms. And then came the fell riders out of Minas Morgul.
The Black Riders,
said Pippin, opening his eyes, and they were wide and dark with an old fear reawakened.
Yes, they were black,
said Beregond.
and I see that you know something of them, though you have not spoken of them in any of your tales.
I know of them,
said Pippin softly.
but I will not speak of them now. So near. So near.
He broke off and lifted his eyes above the river, and it seemed to him that all he could see was a vast and threatening shadow. Perhaps it was mountains looming on the verge of sight, their jagged edges softened by well-nigh 20 leagues of misty air. Perhaps it was but a cloud wall, and beyond that again a yet deeper gloom. But even as he looked, it seemed to his eyes that the gloom was growing and gathering, very slowly, slowly rising to smother the regions of the sun.
So near to Mordor?
Said Beregond quietly.
Yes, there it lies. We seldom name it, but we have dwelt ever in sight of that shadow. Sometimes it seems fainter and more distant, sometimes nearer and darker. It is growing and darkening now, and therefore our fear and disquiet grow too. And the fell riders. Less than a day ago they won back the crossings, and many of our best men were slain. Boromir it was that drove the enemy at last back from the western shore, and we hold still the near half of Osgiliath, for a little while. But we await now a new onslaught here. Maybe the chief onslaught of the war that comes.
When?
Said Pippin.
Have you a guess? For I saw the beacons last night and the errand riders, and Gandalf said that it was a sign that war had begun. He seemed in a desperate hurry, but now everything seems to have slowed up again.
Only because everything is now ready,
said Beregond.
It is but the deep breath before the plunge.
But why were the beacons lit last night?
It is over late to send for aid when you are already besieged,
answered Beregond.
But I do not know the counsel of the Lord and his captains. They have many ways of gathering news, and the Lord Denethor is unlike other men. He sees far.
Some say that he sits alone in his high chamber in the tower at night and bends his thought this way and that. He can read somewhat of the future, and that he will at times search even the mind of the enemy, wrestling with him. And so it is that he is old, worn before his time. But however that may be, my lord Faramir is abroad, beyond the river on some perilous errand, and he may have sent tidings. But if you would know what I think set the beacons ablaze, it was the news that came yestereve out of Lebanon. There is a great fleet drawing near in the mouths of Anduin, manned by the corsairs of Umbar in the south. They have long ceased to fear the might of Gondor, and they have allied them with the enemy, and now make a heavy stroke in his cause. For his attack will draw off much of the help that we look to have from Lebanon and Belfalas, where folk are hardy and numerous. All the more do our thoughts go north to Rohan, and the more glad are we for these tidings of victory that you bring. And yet... He paused and stood up, and looked round north, east, and south.
The doings at Isengard should warn us that we are caught now in a great net in strategy. This is no longer a bickering at the fords, raiding from Ithilien and from Anurian, ambushing and pillaging. This is a great war, long planned, and we are but one piece in it, whatever pride may say. Things move in the far east beyond the inland sea, it is reported, and north in Mirkwood and beyond, and south in Harad. And now all realms should be put to the test, to stand or fall under the shadow. Yet, Master Peregrine, we have this honor. Ever we bear the brunt of the chief hatred of the Dark Lord, for that hatred comes down out of the depths of time and over the deeps of the sea. Here the hammer stroke will fall hardest, and for that reason Mithrandir came hither in such haste, for if we fall, who shall stand? And, Master Peregrine, do you see any hope that we shall stand?
Pippin did not answer. He looked at the great walls and towers and brave banners and the sun in the high sky, and then at the gathering gloom in the east, and he thought of the long fingers of that shadow, of the orcs in the woods and the mountains, the treason of Isengard, the birds of Evil Eye, and the black riders, even in the lanes of the Shire, and of the winged terror, the Nazgûl. He shuddered, and hope seemed to wither, and even at that moment the sun for a second faltered and was obscured, as though a dark wing had passed across it. Almost beyond hearing, he thought he caught, high and far up in the heavens, a cry, faint but heart-quelling, cruel and cold. He blanched and cowered against the wall.
What was that?
Asked Beregond.
You also felt something.
Yes,
Muttered Pippin.
it is the sign of our fall, and the shadow of doom. A fell rider of the air.
Yes, the shadow of doom.
Said Beregond.
I fear that Minas Tirith shall fall. Night comes. The very warmth of my blood seems stolen away.
For a time they sat together with bowed heads and did not speak. Then suddenly Pippin looked up and saw that the sun was still shining and the banners still streaming in the breeze. He shook himself.
It is past.
He said,
No, my heart would not yet despair. Gandalf fell and has returned and is with us. We may stand, if only on one leg, or at least be left still upon our knees.
Rightly said,
cried Beregond, rising and striding to and fro.
Nay, though all things must come utterly to an end in time, Gondor shall not perish yet. Not though the walls be taken by a reckless foe that will build a hill of carrion before them. There are still other fastnesses and secret ways of escape into the mountains. Hope and memory shall live still in some hidden valley where the grass is green.
All the same, I wish it was over for good or ill.
Said Pippin.
I am no warrior at all, and dislike any thought of battle. But waiting on the edge of one that I can't escape is the worst of all. What a long day it seems already. I should be happier if we were not obliged to stand and watch, making no move, striking nowhere first. No stroke would have been struck in Rohan, I think, but for Gandalf.
There you lay your finger on the sword that many feel,
said Beregond.
but things may change when Faramir returns. He is bold, more bold than many deem. For in these days men are slow to believe that a captain can be wise and learned in the scrolls of lore and song as he is.
and yet a man of hardihood and swift judgment in the field. But such is Faramir. Less reckless and eager than Boromir, but not less resolute. Yet what indeed can he do? We cannot assault the mountains of yonder realm. Our reach is shortened, and we cannot strike till some foe comes within it. Yet our hand must be heavy. He smote the hilt of his sword. Pippin looked at him, tall and proud and noble, as all the men that he had yet seen in that land, and with a glitter in his eyes as he thought of the battle.
Alas, my own hand feels as light as a feather,
he thought, but he said nothing.
A pawn, did Gandalf say? Perhaps, but on the wrong chessboard.
So they talked until the sun reached its height, and suddenly the noon bells were rung, and there was a stir in the citadel, for all save the watchmen were going to their meal.
"Will you come with me?"
said Beregond.
"You may join my mess for this day. I do not know what company you will be assigned, or the Lord may hold you at his own command. But you will be welcome, and it will be well to meet as many men as you may, while there is yet time."
I shall be glad to come,
said Pippin.
I am lonely, to tell you the truth. I left my best friend behind in Rohan, and I have had no one to talk to or jest with. Perhaps I could really join your company. Are you the captain? If so, you could take me on, or speak for me.
Nay.
Beregond laughed.
I am no captain, neither office, nor rank, nor lordship have I, being but a plain man of arms of the 3rd Company of the Citadel. Yet, Master Peregrine, to be only a man of arms of the guard of the Tower of Gondor is held worthy in the city, and such men have honour in the land.
Then it is far beyond me,
said Pippin.
Take me back to our room, and if Gandalf is not there, I will go where you like, as your guest.
Gandalf was not in the lodging, and had sent no message. So Pippin went with Beregond, and was made known to the men of the 3rd Company. And it seemed that Beregond got as much honour from it as his guest, for Pippin was very welcome. There had already been much talk in the citadel about Mithrandir's companion and his long closeting with the Lord. A rumour declared that the prince of the halflings had come out of the north to offer allegiance to Gondor and 5,000 swords. And some said that when the riders came to Rohan, each would bring behind him a halfling warrior, small maybe, but doughty. Though Pippin had regretfully to destroy this hopeful tale, he could not be rid of his new rank, only fitting, men thought, to be one befriended by Boromir and honoured by the Lord Denethor. And they thanked him for coming among them, and hung on his words and stories of the outlands, and gave him as much food and ale as he could wish. Indeed, his only trouble was to be wary, according to the counsel of Gandalf, and not to let his tongue wag freely after the manner of a hobbit among friends. At length, Beregond rose.
"Farewell for this time,"
he said.
"I have duty now till sundown, as have all the others here, I think. But if you are lonely, as you say, maybe you would like a merry guide about the city. My son would go with you gladly. A good lad, I may say. If that pleases you, go down to the lowest circle and ask for the old guest house in the Rath Killardine, the Lamplight Street. You will find him there with other lads that are remaining in the city. There may be things worth seeing down at the great gate ere the closing."
He went out, and soon after all the others followed. The day was still fine, though it was growing hazy, and it was hot for March, even so far southwards. Pippin felt sleepy, but the lodging seemed cheerless, and he decided to go down and explore the city. He took a few morsels that he had saved to Shadowfax, and they were graciously accepted, though the horse seemed to have no lack. Then he walked on down many winding ways. People stared much as he passed. To his face men were gravely courteous, saluting him after the manner of Gondor with bowed head and hands upon the breast. But behind him he heard many calls, as those out of doors cried to others within to come and see the Prince of the Halflings, the companion of Mithrandir. Many used some other tongue than the common speech, but it was not long before he learned at least what was meant by Ernil y Pelferianath, and knew that his title had gone down before him into the city. He came at last by arched streets and many fair valleys and pavements to the lowest and widest circle, and there he was directed to the Lamplight Street, a broad way running towards the great gate. In it he found the old guest house, a large building of grey weathered stone, with two wings running back from the street, and between them a narrow greensward, behind which was a many-windowed house, fronted along its whole width by a pillared porch and a flight of steps down onto the grass. Boys were playing among the pillars, the only children that Pippin had seen in Minas Tirith, and he stopped to look at them. Presently one of them caught sight of him, and with a shout he sprang across the grass and came into the street, followed by several others. There he stood in front of Pippin, looking at him up and down.
Greetings,
Said the lad.
where do you come from? You're a stranger in this city. I was,
Said Pippin.
but they say I've become a man of Gondor. Oh, come.
Said the lad.
And we are all men here. But how old are you? And what is your name? I am 10 years already and should soon be 5 feet. I am taller than you, but then my father is a guard, one of the tallest. What is your father? Which question should I answer first?
Said Pippin.
My father farms the lands around Whitwell, near Tuckborough in the Shire. I am nearly 29, so I pass you there, though I am but 4 feet and not likely to grow any more. Safe sideways. You are quite old. So does my Uncle Eolus. Still,
He added hopefully.
I wager I could stand you on your head or lay you on your back. Well, maybe you could if I let you.
Said Pippin with a laugh.
And maybe I could do the same to you. We know some wrestling tricks in my little country, where, let me tell you, I am considered uncommonly large and strong, and I have never allowed anyone to stand me on my head. So if it came to a trial and nothing else would serve, I might have to kill you. For when you are older, you will learn that folk are not always what they seem. And though you may have taken me for a soft stranger lad and easy prey, let me warn you, I am not. I am a halfling. Hard, bold, and wicked.
Pippin pulled such a grim face that the boy stepped back a pace, but at once he returned with clenched fists and the light of battle in his eye.
No.
Pippin laughed.
Don't believe what strangers say of themselves either. I'm not a fighter. But it would be politer in any case for the challenger to say who he is.
The boy drew himself up proudly.
I am Bergil, a son of Beragond of the Guards.
He said.
Oh, so I thought.
Said Pippin.
For you look like your father, knowing him. I know him, and he sent me to find you. Then why did you not say so at once?
Said Bergil, and suddenly a look of dismay came over his face.
Do not tell me that he has changed his mind and will send me away with the maidens. But no, the last winds have gone. His message is less bad than that, if not good.
Said Pippin.
He says that if you would prefer it to standing me on my head, you might show me round the city for a while, and share my loneliness. I can tell you some tales of far countries in return.
Bergil clapped his hands and laughed with relief.
All is well.
He cried.
Come then, we were soon going to the gate. Look on, we will go now. What's happening there? The captains of the Outlands are expected up the south road at sundown. Come with us and you'll see.
Bergil proved to be a good comrade, the best company Pippin had had as he parted from Merry, and soon they were laughing and talking gaily as they went about the streets, heedless of the many glances that men gave them. Before long they found themselves in a throng going towards the great gate. There Pippin went up much in the esteem of Bergil, for when he spoke his name and the password, the guard saluted him and let him pass through, and what was more, he allowed him to take his companion with him.
That is good.
Said Bergil.
We boys are no longer allowed to pass the gate without an elder. Now we can see better.
Beyond the gate there was a crowd of men along the verge of the road, and of the great paved space into which all the ways to Minas Tirith ran. All the eyes were turned southwards, and soon a murmur rose.
There is a dust away there. They are coming!
Pippin and Bergil edged their way forward to the front of the crowd and waited. Horns sounded at some distance, and the noise of cheering rolled towards them like a gathering wind. Then there was a loud trumpet blast, and all about them people were shouting.
Fall on! Fall on!
Pippin heard men calling.
Whoa, what did they say?
He asked.
Forlong has come.
Bergil answered.
Old Forlong, the fat, the Lord of Losanach. That is where my grandsire lives. Hurrah! There he is! Good old Forlong!
Leading the line, there came walking a big thick-limbed horse, and on it sat a man of wide shoulders and huge girth, but old and grey-bearded, yet mail-clad and black-helmed and bearing a long, heavy spear. Behind him marched proudly a dusty line of men, well-armed and bearing great battle-axes. Grim-faced they were, and shorter and somewhat swarthier than any men that Pippin had yet seen in Gondor.
Fall on!
Men shouted,
True heart, true friend, fall on!
but when the men of Losanach had passed, they muttered,
So few, 200, what are they? We hope for 10 times the number. That will be the new tidings of the Black Fleet. They are sparing only a tithe of their strength. Still, every little is a gain.
And so the companies came and were hailed and cheered and passed through the gate. Men of the Outlands were marching to defend the city of Gondor in Dark Isle, but always too few. always less than hope looked for or need asked. The men of Ringil Vale, behind the son of their lord, Dervorin striding on foot, 300s. From the uplands of Morthond, the great Blackroot Vale, tall Druin here with his sons Duilin and Derufin, and 500 bowmen. From the Anfalas, the Langstrand far away, a long line of men of many sorts, hunters and herdsmen, and men of little villages, scantily equipped, save for the household of Golaskil, their lord. From Lamedon a few grim hillmen without a captain. Fisherfolk from the Ethier, some 100 or more spared from the ships. Hirluin, the fair of the green hills from Pinath Gelin, with 300s of gallant green-clad men. And last and proudest, Imrahil, prince of Dol Amroth, kinsman of the Lord, with gilded banners, bearing his token of the ship and the silver swan, and a company of knights with full harness riding grey horses, and behind them 700s of men at arms, tall as lords, grey-eyed, dark-haired, singing as they came. And that was all. Less than 3,000s full told. None more would come. Their cries and the tramp of their feet passed into the city and died away. The onlookers stood silent for a while. Dust hung in the air, for the wind had died, and the evening was heavy. Already the closing hours was drawing nigh, and the red sun had gone behind Mindoluin. Shadow came down on the city. Pippin looked up, and it seemed to him that the sky had grown ashen grey, as if a vast dust and smoke hung above them, and light came dully through it. But in the west the dying sun had set all the fume on fire, and now Mindoluin stood black against a burning smoulder flecked with embers.
So ends a fair day in wrath,
he said, forgetful of the lad at his side.
So it will if I have not returned before the sundown bells,
said Burgil.
Come, there go the trumpets of the closing of the gate.
Hand in hand they went back into the city, the last to pass the gate before it was shut. And as they reached the lamplight street, all the bells in the towers tolled solemnly. Lights sprang in many windows, and from the houses and wards of the men-at-arms along the walls there came the sound of song.
Farewell for this time,
said Beargill.
Take my greetings to my father, and thank him for the company that he sent. Come again soon, I beg. Almost I wish now that there was no war, for we might have had some merry times. We might have journeyed to Losanach, to my grandsire's house. It is good to be there in spring. The woods and fields are full of flowers. But maybe we will go hither together yet. They will never overcome our lord, and my father is very valiant. Farewell and return.
They parted, and Pippin hurried back towards the citadel. It seemed a long way, and he grew hot and very hungry, and night closed down swift and dark. Not a star pricked the sky. He was late for the day meal in the mess, and Beregond greeted him gladly, and sat him at his side to hear the news of his son. After the meal Pippin stayed a while, and then took his leave, for a strange gloom was on him, and now he desired very much to see Gandalf again.
Can you find your way?
Said Beregond at the door of the small hall, on the north side of the citadel, where they had sat.
It is a black night, and all the blackness since orders came that lights have to be dimmed within the city, and none are to shine out of the walls. And I can give you news of another order. You will be summoned to the Lord Denethor early tomorrow. I fear you will not be for the third company. Still, we may hope to meet again. Farewell and sleep in peace.
The lodging was dark, save for a little lantern set on the table. Gandalf was not there. Gloom settled still more heavily on Pippin. He climbed on the bench, and tried to peer out a window, but it was like looking into a pool of ink. He got down and closed the shutter and went to bed. For a while he lay and listened for sounds of Gandalf's return. And then he fell into an uneasy sleep. In the night he was wakened by a light, and he saw that Gandalf had come and was pacing to and fro in the room beyond the curtain of the alcove. There were candles on the table and rolls of parchment. He heard the wizard sigh and mutter.
When will Faramir return?
Hello,
said Pippin, poking his head around the curtain.
I thought you had forgotten all about me. I am glad to see you back. It has been a long day.
But the night will be too short,
said Gandalf.
I have come back here, for I must have a little peace, alone. You should sleep in a bed while you still may. At the sunrise I shall take you to the Lord Denethor again. No, when the summons comes, not at sunrise. The darkness has begun. There will be no dawn.
Gandalf was gone, and the thudding hooves of Shadowfax were lost in the night when Merry came back to Aragorn. He had only a light bundle, for he had lost his pack at Bath Garland, and all he had was a few useful things he had picked up among the wreckage of Isengard. Hasselful was already saddled. Legolas and Gimli with their horse stood close by.
So, 4 of the company still remain,
said Aragorn.
We will ride on together, but we shall not go alone as I thought. The king is now determined to set out at once. Since the coming of the winged shadow, he desires to return to the hills under the cover of night.
And then whither? Said Legolas.
I cannot say yet,
Aragorn answered. As for the king, he will go to the muster that he commanded at Edoras.
4 nights from now. And there I think he will hear tidings of war, and the riders of Rohan will go down to Minas Tirith. But for myself, and any that go with me...
I, for one, cried Legolas.
And Gimli with him,
said the dwarf. Well, for myself, said Aragorn. It is dark before me. I must go down also to Minas Tirith. But I do not yet see the road. An hour long prepared approaches.
Leave behind.
Said Merry.
I've not been much use yet, but I don't want to be laid aside like baggage to be cold for when all is over. I don't think the riders will want to be bothered with me now. Though, of course, the king did say that I was to sit by him when he came to his house and tell him all about the Shire.
Yes, said Aragorn, and your road lies with him, I think, Merry. But do not look for mirth at the ending. It will be long, I fear, ere Theoden sits at ease again in Meduseld. Many hopes will wither in this bitter spring. Soon all were ready to depart. 24 horses, Gimli behind Legolas, and Merry in front of Aragorn. Presently they were riding swiftly through the night. They had not long passed the mounds of the Falls of Isen when a rider galloped up from the rear of their line. He said to the king,
There are horsemen behind us. As we crossed the fords, I thought that I heard them. Now we are sure. They are overtaking us, riding hard.
Theoden at once called a halt. The riders turned about and seized their spears. Aragorn dismounted and set Merry on the ground, and drawing his sword, he stood by the king's stirrup. Eomer and his esquire rode back to the rear. Merry felt more like unneeded baggage than ever, and he wondered, if there was a fight, what he should do. Supposing the king's small escort was trapped and overcome, but he escaped into the darkness, alone, in the wild fields of Rohan with no idea of where he was, in all the endless miles. No good, he thought. He drew his sword and tightened his belt. The sinking moon was obscured by a great sailing cloud, but suddenly it rode out clear again. Then they all heard the sound of hooves, and at the same moment they saw dark shapes coming swiftly on the path from the fords. The moonlight glinted here and there on the points of spears. The number of the pursuers could not be told, but they seemed no fewer than the king's escort at least. When they were some 50 paces off, Eomer cried in a loud voice. The pursuers brought their steeds to a sudden stand. A silence followed. And then in the moonlight a horseman could be seen dismounting and walking slowly forward. His hand showed white as he held it up, palm outward in token of peace, but the king's men gripped their weapons. At 10 paces the man stopped. He was tall, a dark standing shadow. Then his clear voice rang out.
Rohan! Rohan, did you say? That is a glad word. We seek that land in haste from long afar.
You have found it.
Said Eomer.
When you crossed the fords yonder, you entered it. But it is the realm of Theoden the king. None ride here save by his leave. Who are you, and what is your haste?
Halbarad Dunadan, Ranger of the North, I am.
Cried the man.
We seek one Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and we heard that he was in Rohan.
And you have him also.
Cried Aragorn. Giving his reins to Merry, he ran forward and embraced the newcomer.
Halbarad,
He said.
of all the joys, this is the least expected.
Merry breathed a sigh of relief. He had thought that this was some last trick of Saruman's to waylay the king while he had only a few men about him, but it seemed that there would be no need to die in Theoden's defense. Not yet, at any rate. He sheathed his sword.
All is well,
Said Aragorn, turning back.
Here are some of my own kin from the far land where I dwelt. But why they come and how many they be, Halbarad shall tell us.
I have 30 with me.
Said Halbarad.
That is all of our kindred that could be gathered in haste. But the brethren Eladan and Erohir have ridden with us, desiring to go to the war. We rode as swiftly as we might, when your summons came.
But I did not summon you,
Said Aragorn.
save only in wish. My thoughts have often turned to you, and seldom more than tonight, yet I have sent no word. But come, all such matters must wait. You find us riding in haste and danger. Ride with us now, if the king will give his leave.
Theoden was indeed glad of the news.
It is well,
he said.
If these kinsmen be in any way like to yourself, my lord Aragorn, 30 such knights will be a strength that cannot be counted by heads.
Then the riders set out again, and Aragorn for a while rode with the Dunedain. And when they had spoken of tidings in the north and the south, Elrohir said to him,
I bring word to you from my father. The days are short. If thou art in haste, remember the paths of the dead. Always my days have seemed to me too short to achieve my desire.
answered Aragorn.
But great indeed will be my haste ere I take that road. That will soon be seen.
Said Elrohir.
But let us speak no more of these things upon the open road.
And Aragorn said to Halbarad,
What is that you bear, kinsman? For he saw that instead of a spear he bore a tall staff, as it were a standard, but it was close furled in a black cloth bound about with many thorns. It is a gift that I bring to you from the Lady of Rivendell,
answered Halbarad.
She wrote it in secret, and long was the making. But she also sends word to you. The days now are short. Either our hope cometh, or all hopes end. Therefore I send thee what I have made for thee. Farewell, Elfstone.
And Aragorn said,
Now I know what you bear. Bear it still for me a while.
And he turned and looked away to the north under the great stars, and then he fell silent, and spoke no more while the night's journey lasted. The night was old, and the east grey, when they rode up at last from Deeping Combe and came back to the Hornburg. There they were to lie, and rest for a brief while, and take counsel. Merry slept until he was roused by Legolas and Gimli.
The sun is high,
said Legolas.
All others are up and doing. Come, Master Sluggard, and look at this place while you may.
There was a battle here 3 nights ago,
said Gimli.
and here Legolas and I played a game that I won only by a single orc. Come and see how it was. And there are caves, Merry, caves of wonder. Shall we visit them, Legolas, do you think?
Nay, there is no time,
said the elf.
Do not spoil the wonder with haste. I have given you my word to return hither with you if a day of peace and freedom comes again. But it is now near to noon, and at that hour we eat and then set out again, I hear.
Merry got up and yawned. His few hours' sleep had not been nearly enough. He was tired and rather dismal. He missed Pippin, and felt that he was only a burden, while everybody was making plans for speed in a business that he did not fully understand.
Where is Aragorn?
He asked.
In a high chamber of the burg,
said Legolas.
He has neither rested nor slept, I think. He went thither some hours ago, saying that he must take thought, and only his kinsman Halbarad went with him. But some dark doubt or care sits on him.
They are a strange company, these newcomers,
said Gimli.
Stout men and lordly they are, and the riders of Rohan look almost as boys beside them, for they are grim men of face, worn like weathered rocks for the most part, even as Aragorn himself. And they are silent.
But even as Aragorn, they are courteous, if they break their silence.
Said Legolas.
And have you marked the brethren Elodan and Elrohir? Less sombre is their gear than the others, and they are fair and gallant as elven lords, and that is not to be wondered at in the sons of Elrond of Rivendell. Why have they come? Have you heard?
Asked Merry. He had now dressed and flung his grey cloak about his shoulders, and the three passed out together towards the ruined gate of the burg.
They answered the summons, as you heard.
Said Gimli.
Word came to Rivendell, they say. Aragorn has need of his kindred. Let the Dunedain ride to him in the Rohan. But whence this message came, they are now in doubt. Gandalf sent it, I would guess.
Nay, Galadriel.
Said Legolas.
Did she not speak through Gandalf of the ride of the Grey Company from the north?
Yes, you have it!
Said Gimli.
The Lady of the Wood. She read many hearts and desires. Now why did not we wish for some of our own kinsfolk, Legolas?
Legolas stood before the gate and turned his bright eyes away north and east, and his fair face was troubled.
I do not think that any would come,
he answered.
They have no need to ride to war. War already marches on their own lands.
For a while the three companions walked together, speaking of this and that turn of the battle. And they went down from the broken gate and past the mounds of the fallen on the greensward beside the road, until they stood on Helm's Dyke and looked into the Combe. The Death Down already stood there, black and tall and stony, and the great trampling and scoring of the grass by the Huorns could be plainly seen. The Durnaldings and many men of the garrison of the burg were at work on the dyke, or in the fields and about the battered walls behind. Yet all seemed strangely quiet. a weary valley resting after a great storm. Soon they turned back and went to the midday meal in the hall of the burg. The king was already there, and as soon as they entered he called for Merry and had a seat for him at his side.
It is not as I would have it,
Said Theoden.
for this is little like my fair house in Edoras. And your friend is gone, who should also be here, but it may be long ere we sit, you and I, at the high table in Meduseld. There will be no time for feasting when I return thither. But come now, eat and drink, and let us speak together while we may. And then you shall ride with me.
Oh, may I?
Said Merry, surprised and delighted.
That would be splendid.
He had never felt more grateful for any kindness in words.
I'm afraid I'm only in everybody's way.
He stammered.
But I should like to do anything I could, you know.
I doubt it not.
Said the king.
I have had a good hill pony made ready for you. He will bear you as swift as any horse by the roads that we shall take. For I will ride from the burg by mountain paths, not by the plain, and so come to Edoras by way of Dunharrow, where the Lady Eowyn awaits me. You shall be my squire, if you will. Is there any gear of this place?
There are no great weapon hoards here, lord.
Answered Eomer.
Maybe a light helm might be found to fit it, but we have no mail or sword for one of his stature.
I have a sword.
Said Merry, climbing from his seat and drawing from his black sheath his small bright blade. Filled suddenly with love for this old man, he knelt on one knee and took his hand and kissed it.
May I lay the sword of Meriadoc of the Shire on your lap, Theoden King?
He cried.
Receive my service, if you will. Gladly will I take it.
Said the king, and laying his old hands upon the brown hair of the hobbit, he blessed him.
Rise now, Meriadoc, Esquire of Rohan of the household of Meduseld,
He said.
Take your sword and bear it unto good fortune.
As a father you shall be to me.
Said Merry.
For a little while.
Said Theoden. They talked then together as they ate, until presently Eomer spoke.
It is near the hour that we set for our going, lord.
He said.
Shall I bid men sound the horns? But where's Aragorn? His place is empty and he has not eaten.
We will make ready to ride,
Said Theoden.
but let word be sent to the Lord Aragorn that the hour is nigh.
The king with his guard and Merry at his side passed down from the gate of the burg to where the riders were assembling on the green. Many were already mounted. It would be a great company, for the king was leaving only a small garrison in the burg, and all who could be spared were riding to the weapon take at Edoras. 1,000 spears had indeed already ridden away at night, but still there would be some 500 more to go with the king, for the most part men of the fields and dales of Westfold. A little apart the rangers sat, silent, in an ordered company, armed with spear and bow and sword. They were clad in cloaks of dark grey, and their hoods were cast now over helm and head. Their horses were strong and of proud bearing, but rough haired, and one stood there without a rider. Aragorn's own horse they had brought from the north. Rohirrim was his name. There was no gleam of stone or gold or any fair thing in all their gear and harness, nor did their riders bear any badge or token, save only that each cloak was pinned upon the left shoulder by a brooch of silver, shaped like a rayed star. The king mounted his horse, Snowmane, and Merry sat beside him on his pony. Stibba was his name. Presently Eomer came out of the gate, and with him was Aragorn, and Halbarad bearing the great staff close furled in black, and 2 tall men, neither young nor old. So much alike were they, the sons of Elrond, that few could tell them apart. Dark-haired, grey-eyed, and their faces elven fair, clad alike in bright mail beneath cloaks of silver grey. Behind them walked Legolas and Gimli, but Merry had eyes only for Aragorn. So startling was the change he saw in him, as if one night many years had fallen on his head. Grim was his face, grey-hued and weary.
I am troubled in mind, Lord.
He said, standing by the king's horse.
I have heard strange words, and I see new perils far off.
I have labored long in thought, and now I fear that I must change my purpose. Tell me, Theoden, you ride now to Dunharrow. How long will it be ere you come there?
It is a full hour past noon.
Said Eomer.
Before the night of the 3rd day from now we should come to the hold. The moon will then be 1 night past its full, and the muster that the king commanded will be held the day after. More speed we cannot make if the strength of Rohan is to be gathered.
Aragorn was silent for a moment. 3 days, he murmured.
And the muster of Rohan will only be begun.
but I see that it cannot now be hastened. He looked up, and it seemed that he had made some decision. His face was less troubled.
Then by your leave, Lord, I must take new counsel for myself and my kindred. We must ride our own road, and no longer in secret. For me, the time of stealth has passed. I will ride east by the swiftest way, and I will take the paths of the dead. The paths of the dead,
said Theoden and trembled.
Why do you speak of them? Eomer turned and gazed at Aragorn, and it seemed to Merry that the faces of the riders that sat within hearing turned pale at the words. If there be truth in such paths,
said Theoden,
their gate is in Dunharrow, but no living man may pass it.
Alas, Aragorn, my friend,
said Eomer.
I had hoped that we would ride to war together. But if you see the paths of the dead, then our parting is come, and it is little likely that we shall ever meet again under the sun.
That road I will take nonetheless,
said Aragorn.
But I say to you, Eomer, that in battle we may yet meet again, though all the hosts of Mordor should stand between. You will do as you will, my lord Aragorn,
said Theoden.
It is your doom, maybe, to tread strange paths that others dare not. This parting grieves me, and my strength is lessened by it. But now I must take the mountain roads and delay no longer. Farewell. Farewell, lord,
said Aragorn.
Ride unto great renown. Farewell, Merry. I leave you in good hands. Better than we hoped when we hunted the orcs to Fanghorn. Legolas and Gimli will still hunt with me, I hope. But we shall not forget you. Goodbye,
said Merry. He could find no more to say. He felt very small, and he was puzzled and depressed by all these gloomy words. More than ever, he missed the unquenchable cheerfulness of Pippin. The riders were ready, and their horses were fidgeting. He wished they would start and get it over. Now Theoden spoke to Eomer, and lifted up his hand and cried aloud. And with that word, the riders set forth. They rode over the dike, and down the coombe, and then, turning swiftly eastwards, they took a path that skirted the foothills for a mile or so, until bending south, it passed back among the hills, and disappeared from view. Aragorn rode to the dike, and watched till the king's men were far down the coombe. Then he turned to Halbarad. There go three that I love, and the smallest not the least, he said. He knows not to what end he rides, yet if he knew, he still would go on.
A little people, but of great worth are the Shire folk,
said Halbarad.
Little do they know of our long labour for the safe keeping of their borders. Yet I grudge it not, and now our fates are woven together,
said Aragorn.
And yet, alas, here we must part. Well, I must eat a little, and then we also must hasten away. Come, Legolas and Gimli, I must speak with you as I eat.
Together they went back into the burg. Yet for some time Aragorn sat silent at the table in the hall, and the others waited for him to speak.
Come,
said Legolas at last.
Speak and be comforted, and shake off the shadow. What has happened since we came back to this grim place in the grey morning? A struggle somewhat grimmer for my part than the Battle of the Hornburg,
said Aragorn.
I have looked in the stone of Orthanc, my friends.
You have looked in that accursed stone of wizardry!
Exclaimed Gimli with fear and astonishment in his face.
Did you say aught to him? Even Gandalf feared that encounter.
You forget to whom you speak,
said Aragorn sternly, and his eyes glinted.
What do you fear that I should say to him? Did I not openly proclaim my title before the doors of Edoras? Nay, Gimli,
he said in a softer voice, and the grimness left his face, and he looked like one who has laboured in sleepless pain for many nights.
Nay, my friends, I am the lawful master of the stone, and I had both the right and the strength to use it. Or so I judged. The right cannot be doubted. The strength was enough. Barely.
He drew a deep breath.
It was a bitter struggle, and the weariness is slow to pass. I spoke no word to him, and in the end I wrenched the stone to my own will. That alone he will find hard to endure. And he beheld me. Yes, Master Gimli, he saw me, but in other guise than you see me here. If that will aid him, then I have done ill, but I do not think so. To know that I lived and walked the earth was a blow to his heart, I deem, for he knew it not until now. The eyes in Orthanc did not see through the armour of Theoden, but Sauron has not forgotten Isildur and the sword of Elendil. Now, in the very hour of his great designs, the heir of Isildur and the sword are revealed. For I showed the blade reforged to him. He is not so mighty yet that he is above fear. Nay, doubt ever gnaws him.
But he wields great dominion nonetheless,
said Gimli.
and now he will strike more swiftly.
The hasty stroke goes off to stray,
said Aragorn.
We must press our enemy and no longer wait upon him for the move. See, my friends, when I had mastered the stone, I learned many things. A grave peril I saw coming unlooked for upon Gondor from the south, that will draw off great strength from the defense of Minas Tirith. If it is not countered swiftly, I deem that the city will be lost ere 10 days be gone.
Then lost it must be.
Said Gimli.
For what help is there to send thither? And how could it come there in time?
I have no help to send, therefore I must go myself.
Said Aragorn.
But there is only one way through the mountains that will bring me to the coastlands before all is lost. That is the paths of the dead.
The paths of the dead.
Said Gimli.
It is a fell name, and little to the liking of the men of Rohan, as I saw. Can the living use such a road and not perish? And even if you pass that way, what will so few avail to counter the strokes of Mordor?
The living have never used that road since the coming of the Rohirrim,
said Aragorn.
For it is closed to them. But in this dark hour, the heir of Isildur may use it, if he dare. Listen! This is the word that the sons of Elrond bring to me from their father in Rivendell, wisest in lore. Bid Aragorn remember the words of the seer and the paths of the dead.
And what may be the words of the seer?
Said Legolas.
Thus spoke Malbeth the seer in the days of Arvendui, last king at Fornost.
Said Aragorn.
Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles to the tombs of kings. Doom approaches. The dead awaken, for the hour is come for the oath breakers. At the stone of Erech they shall stand again, and hear there a horn in the hills ringing. Whose shall the horn be? Who shall call them from the grey twilight? The forgotten people, the heir of him to whom the oath they swore. From the north shall he come, need shall drive him. He shall pass the door to the paths of the dead.
Dark ways, doubtless,
said Gimli.
but no darker than these staves are to me.
If you would understand them better, then I bid you come with me.
Said Aragorn.
For that way I now shall take, but I do not go gladly. Only need drives me, therefore only of your free will would I have you come. For you will find both toil and great fear, maybe worse.
I will go with you even on the paths of the dead, and to whatever end they may lead.
Said Gimli.
I also,
Said
for I
Legolas.
do not fear the dead.
I hope that the forgotten people will not have forgotten how to fight,
Said Gimli.
for otherwise I see not why we should trouble them.
That we shall know if we ever come to Erech.
Said Aragorn.
But the oath that they broke was to fight against Sauron, and they must fight, therefore, if they are to fulfill it. For at Erech there stands yet a black stone that was brought, it was said, from Númenor by Isildur. And it was set upon a hill, and upon it the king of the mountains swore allegiance to him in the beginning of the realm of Gondor. But when Sauron returned and grew in might again, Isildur summoned the men of the mountains to fulfill their oath, and they would not, for they had worshipped Sauron in the dark years. Then Isildur said to the king, Thou shalt be the last king, and if the west prove mightier than thy black master, this curse I lay upon thee and thy folk, to rest never until your oath is fulfilled. For this war will last through years uncounted, and you shall be summoned once again ere the end. And they fled before the wrath of Isildur, and did not dare to go forth to war on Sauron's part. And they hid themselves in secret places, in the mountains, and had no dealings with other men, but slowly dwindled in the barren hills, and the terror of the sleepless dead lies about the hill of Erech and all places where that people lingered. But that way I must go, since there are none living to help me.
He stood up.
Come!
He cried and drew his sword, and it flashed in the twilight hall of the burg.
To the stone of Erech! I seek the paths of the dead. Come with me, who will.
Legolas and Gimli made no answer, but they rose and followed Aragorn from the hall. On the green they waited, still and silent, the hooded rangers. Legolas and Gimli mounted. Aragorn sprang up upon Rohirrim. Then Halbarad lifted the great horn, and a blast of it echoed in Helm's Deep, and with that they leapt away, riding down the coombe like thunder, while all the men that were left on dyke or burg stared in amaze. And while Theoden went by slow paths in the hills, the grey company passed swiftly over the plain, and on the next day, in the afternoon, they came to Edoras. And there they halted only briefly, ere they passed up the valley, and so came to Dunharrow as darkness fell. The Lady Éowyn greeted them, and was glad of their coming, for no mightier men had she seen than the Dunedain, and the fair sons of Elrond. But on Aragorn most of all her eyes rested, and when they ate supper with her they talked together, and she heard of all that had passed since Theoden rode away, concerning which only hasty tidings had yet reached her. And when she heard of the battle in Helm's Deep, and the great slaughter of their foes, and of the charge of Theoden and his knights, then her eyes shone. But at last she said,
Lords, you are weary, and shall now go to your beds with such ease as can be contrived in haste. But tomorrow fairer housing shall be found for you.
But Aragorn said,
Nay, lady, be not troubled for us. If we may lie here tonight and break our fast tomorrow, it will be enough. For I ride on an errand most urgent. With the first light of morning we must go.
She smiled on him and said,
Then it was kindly done, Lord, to ride so many miles out of your way to bring tidings to Éowyn, and to speak with her in her exile. Indeed, no man would count such a journey wasted,
said Aragorn.
And yet, lady, I would not have come hither, if it were not that the road which I must take leads me to Dunharrow.
And she answered as one that likes not what is said,
Then, Lord, you are astray. For out of Harrowdale no road runs east or south, and you had best return as you came. Nay, lady,
said he,
I am not astray, for I walked in this land ere you were born to grace it. There is a road out of this valley, and that road I shall take. Tomorrow I shall ride by the paths of the dead.
Then she stared at him as one that is stricken, and her face blanched, and for long she spoke no more, while all sat silent.
But Aragorn,
she said at last,
is it that your errand to seek death? For that is all you will find on that road. They do not suffer the living to pass.
They may suffer me to pass,
said Aragorn,
but at the least I will adventure it. No other road will serve.
But this is madness,
she said.
For here are men of renown and prowess whom you should not take into the shadows, but should lead to war, where men are needed. I beg you to remain and ride with my brother, for then all our hearts will be gladdened and our hope will be brighter.
It is not madness, lady,
he answered,
for I go on a path appointed. For those who follow me do so of their free will, and if they wish now to remain and ride with the Rohirrim, they may do so. But I shall take the paths of the dead, alone, if needs be.
Then they said no more, and they ate in silence. But her eyes were ever upon Aragorn, and the others saw that she was in great torment of mind. At length they arose, and took their leave of the lady, and thanked her for her care, and went to their rest. But as Aragorn came to the booth where he was to lodge with Legolas and Gimli, and his companions had gone in, there came the Lady Éowyn after him, and called to him. He turned and saw her as a glimmer in the night, for she was clad in white, but her eyes were on fire.
Aragorn,
she said.
Why will you go on this deadly road?
Because I must,
he said.
Only so can I see any hope of doing my part in the war against Sauron. I do not choose paths of peril, Éowyn. Were I to go where my heart dwells, far in the north I would now be wandering in the fair valley of Rivendell.
For a while she was silent, as if pondering what this might mean. Then suddenly she laid her hand on his arm.
You are a stern lord and resolute,
she said.
And thus do men win renown.
She paused.
Lord,
she said,
if you must go, then let me ride in your following. For I am weary of skulking in the hills and wish to face peril in battle.
Your duty is with your people, he answered.
Too often have I heard of duty,
she cried.
But am I not of the house of Eol, a shield maiden, not a dry nurse? I have waited on faltering feet long enough. Since they falter no longer, it seems. May I not now spend my life as I will? Few may do that with honor,
he answered.
But as for you, lady, did you not accept the charge to govern the people until the Lord's return? If you had not been chosen, then some marshal or captain would have been set to the same place, and he could not ride away from his charge were he weary of it or no. Shall I always be chosen?
She said bitterly.
Shall I always be left when the riders depart, to mind the house while they win renown and find foods and beds when they return?
"A time may come soon," said he, "when none will return. Then there will be need of valor without renown, for none shall remember the deeds that are done in the last defense of your homes. Yet the deeds will not be less valiant because they are unpraised." And she answered,
All your words are but to say you are a woman, and your part is in the house. But when the men have died in battle and honor, you have leave to be burned in the house, for the men will need it no more. But I am of the house of Eol, and not a serving woman. I can ride, and wield blade, and I do not fear either pain nor death.
"What do you fear, lady?" he asked.
A cage,
She said,
to stay behind bars until use and old age accept them. And all chance of doing great deeds is gone beyond recall or
"And
desire.
yet you counseled me not to adventure on the road that I had chosen because it is perilous?"
So may one counsel another.
She said,
Yet I do not bid you flee from peril, but to ride to battle where your sword may win renown and victory. I would not see a thing that is high and excellent cast away needlessly.
"Nor would I," he said. "Therefore I say to you, lady, stay, for you have no errand in the south."
Neither have those who go with thee. They go only because they would not be parted from thee. Because they love thee.
Then she turned and vanished into the night. When the light of day was come into the sky, but the sun was not yet risen above the high ridges in the east, Aragorn made ready to depart. His company was all mounted, and he was about to leap into the saddle when the Lady Eowyn came to bid them farewell. She was clad as a rider and girt with a sword. In her hand she bore a cup, and she set it to her lips and drank a little, wishing them good speed. And then she gave the cup to Aragorn. And he drank, and he said, "Farewell, Lady of Rohan. I drink to the fortunes of your house, and of you, and of all your people. Say to your brother, beyond the shadows we may meet again." Then it seemed to Gimli and Legolas, who were nearby, that she wept. And in one so stern and proud, that seemed the more grievous. But she said,
Aragorn, wilt thou go?
"I will," he said.
Then wilt thou not let me ride with this company as I've asked?
"I will not, lady," he said. "For that I could not grant without leave of the king and of your brother, and they will not return until tomorrow. But I now count every hour, indeed, every minute. Farewell." Then she fell on her knees, saying,
I beg thee.
"Nay, lady," he said. Taking her by the hand, he raised her. Then he kissed her hand, and sprang into the saddle, and rode away, and did not look back. And only those who knew him well and were near to him saw the pain that he bore. But Eowyn stood still as a figure carven in stone, her hands clenched at her sides, and she watched them until they passed into the shadow under the black Drumaberg, the haunted mountain, in which was the gate of the dead. When they were lost to view, she turned, stumbling as one that is blind, and went back to her lodging. But none of her folk saw this parting, for they hid themselves in fear and would not come forth until the day was up, and the reckless strangers were gone. And some said, "They are elvish wights. Let them go where they belong, into the dark places, and never return. The times are evil enough." The light was still grey as they rode, for the sun had not yet climbed over the black ridges of the haunted mountain before them. A dread fell on them, even as they passed between the lines of ancient stones, and so came to the Dimholt. There, under the gloom of black trees that not even Legolas could long endure, they found a hollow place, opening at the mountain's root. And right in their path stood a single mighty stone, like a finger of doom.
My blood runs chill,
said Gimli. But the others were silent, and his voice fell dead on the dank fern needles at his feet. The horses would not pass the threatening stone until the riders dismounted and led them about. And so they came at last deep into the glen, and there stood a sheer wall of rock, and in the wall the dark door gaped before them like a mouth of night. Signs and figures were carved above its wide arch, too dim to read, and fear flowed from it like a grey vapor. The company halted, and there was not a heart among them that did not quail, unless it were the heart of Legolas of the elves, for whom the ghosts of men have no terror.
This is an evil door,
Said Halbarad.
and my death lies beyond it. I will dare to pass it nonetheless, but no horse will enter. But we must go in, and therefore the horses must go too.
Said Aragorn.
For if ever we come through this darkness, many leagues lie beyond, and every hour that is lost there will bring the triumph of Sauron nearer. Follow me.
Then Aragorn led the way, and such was the strength of his will in that hour that all the Dunedain and their horses followed him. And indeed the love that the horses of the rangers bore to their riders was so great that they were willing to face even the terror of the door. But Arod, the horse of Rohan, refused the way, and he stood sweating and trembling in fear that was grievous to see. Then Legolas laid his hand on his eyes and sang some words that went soft in the gloom, until he suffered himself to be led. And Legolas passed in. And there stood Gimli the dwarf, left all alone. His knees shook, and he was wroth with himself.
Here is a thing unheard of.
He said.
An elf will go underground and a dwarf dare not.
With that he plunged in, but it seemed to him that he dragged his feet, like lead over the threshold. And at once the blindness came over him, even upon Gimli, Glóin's son, who had walked unafraid in many deep places of the world. Aragorn had brought torches from Dunharrow, and now he went ahead, bearing one aloft, and Eladan with another went at the rear, and Gimli, stumbling behind, strove to overtake him. He could see nothing but the dim flame of the torches, but if the company halted, there seemed an endless whisper of voices all about him, a murmur of words in no tongue that he had ever heard before. Nothing assailed the company nor withstood their passage, and yet steadily fear grew on the dwarf as he went on, most of all because he knew now that there could be no turning back. All the paths behind were thronged by an unseen host that followed in the dark. So time unreckoned passed, until Gimli saw a sight that was ever afterwards loath to recall. The road was wide, as far as he could judge, but now the company came suddenly into a great empty space, and there were no longer any walls on either side. The dread was so heavy on him that he could hardly walk. Away to the left something glittered in the glooms, as Aragorn's torch drew near. Then Aragorn halted and went to look what it might be.
Does he feel no fear?
Muttered the dwarf.
In any other cave, Gimli, Glóin's son, would have been the first to run to the gleam of gold. But not here. Let it lie.
Nonetheless, he drew near, and saw Aragorn kneeling, while Eladan held aloft both torches. Before him there were the bones of a mighty man. He had been clad in mail, and still his harness lay there whole, for the cavern's air was as dry as dust, and his hauberk was gilded. His belt was of gold and garnets, and rich with gold was the helm upon his bony head face downward on the floor. He had walked near the far wall of the cave, as now could be seen, and before him stood a stony door closed fast. His finger bones were still clawing at the cracks. A notched and broken sword lay by him, as if he had hewn at the rock in his last despair. Aragorn did not touch him, but gazed silently for a while. He rose and sighed.
Hither shall the flowers of Cymbalmene come never unto world's end.
He muttered.
9 mounds and 7 there are now green with grass, and though all the long years he has lain at the door that he could not unlock, whither does it lead? Why would he pass? None shall ever know. For that is not my
He
errand.
cried, turning back and speaking to the whispering darkness behind.
Keep your hoards and your secrets hidden in the accursed years. Speed only we ask. Let us pass, and then come. I summon you to the Stone of Erech!
There was no answer, unless it were an utter silence more dreadful than the whispers before, and then a chill blast came in which the torches flickered and went out, and could not be rekindled.
Of the time that followed, 1 hour or many, Gimli remembered little. The others pressed on, but he was ever hindmost, pursued by a groping horror that seemed always just about to seize him, and a rumour came after him like the shadow sound of many feet. He stumbled on until he was crawling like a beast on the ground, and felt that he could endure no more. He must either find an ending and escape, or run back in madness to meet the following fear. Suddenly he heard the tinkle of water, a sound hard and clear as a stone, falling into a dream of dark shadow. Light grew, and lo, the company passed through another gateway, high-arched and broad, and a rill ran out beside them, and beyond, going steeply down, was a road between sheer cliffs, knife-edged against the sky far above. So deep and narrow was that chasm that the sky was dark, and in it small stars glinted. Yet as Gimli after learned, it was still 2 hours ere sunset of the day on which they had set out from Dunharrow. Though for all that, he could then tell it might have been twilight in some later year, or in some other world. The company now mounted again, and Gimli returned to Legolas. They rode in file, and evening came on, and a deep blue dusk, and still fear pursued them. Legolas, turning to speak to Gimli, looked back, and the dwarf saw before his face the glitter in the elf's bright eyes. Behind them rode Eladan, last of the company, but not the last of those that took the road. "The dead are following," said Legolas. "I see shapes of men and of horses, and pale banners like shreds of cloud, and spears like winter thickets on a misty night. The dead are following."
Yes, the dead ride behind.
"They have been summoned," said Eladan. The company came at last out of the ravine, as suddenly as if they had issued from a crack in the wall. And there lay the uplands of a great vale before them, and the stream beside them went down with a cold voice over many falls.
Where in Middle-earth are we?
Said Gimli, and Eladan answered,
"We have descended from the uprising of the Morthond, the long chill river that flows at last to the sea that washes the walls of Dol Amroth. You will not need to ask hereafter how comes its name. Blackroot, men call it."
The Morthond Vale made a great bay that beat up against the sheer southern faces of the mountains, but all was grey in that hour, for the sun had gone, and far below lights twinkled in the homes of men. The vale was rich, and many folk dwelt there. Then, without turning, Aragorn cried aloud so that all could hear.
Friends, forget your weariness! Ride now! Ride! We must come to the stone of Erech ere this day passes, and long still is the way!
So without looking back, they rode the mountain fields until they came to a bridge over the growing torrent and found a road that went down into the land. Lights went out in house and hamlet as they came, and doors were shut, and folk that were afield cried in terror and ran wild like hunted deer. Ever there rose the same cry in the gathering night. "The King of the Dead! The King of the Dead is come upon us!" Bells were ringing far below, and all men fled before the face of Aragorn. But the great company, in their haste, rode like hunters until their horses were stumbling with weariness. And thus, just ere midnight, and in a darkness as black as the caverns in the mountains, they came at last to the hill of Erech. Long had the terror of the dead lain upon that hill, and upon the empty fields about it, for upon the top stood a black stone, round as a great globe, the height of a man, though its half was buried in the ground. Unearthly it looked, as though it had fallen from the sky, as some believed, but those who remembered still the lore of Westerness told that it had been brought out of the ruin of Númenor, and there set by Isildur at his landing. None of the people of the valley dared to approach it, nor would they dwell near, for they said that it was a trysting place of the Shadow Men, and there they would gather in times of fear, thronging round the stone and whispering. To that stone the company came and halted in the dead of night. Then Elrohir gave to Aragorn a silver horn, and he blew upon it, and it seemed to those that stood near that they heard a sound of answering horns, as if it was an echo in deep caves far away. No other sound they heard, and yet they were aware of a great host gathered all about the hill on which they stood, and a chill wind like the breath of ghosts came down from the mountains. But Aragorn dismounted, and standing by the stone he cried in a great voice,
Oathbreakers! Why have ye come?
and a voice was heard out of the night that answered him, as if from far away. Then Aragorn said,
The hour is come at last. Now I go to Pelargir upon Anduin, and ye shall come after me. And when all this land is clean of the servants of Sauron, I will hold the oath fulfilled, and ye shall have peace and depart forever. For I am Elessar, Isildur's heir of Gondor!
and with that he bade Halbarad unfurl the great standard which he had brought, and behold, it was black, and if there was any device upon it, it was hidden in the darkness. Then there was silence, and not a whisper nor a sigh was heard again all the long night. The company camped beside the stone, but they slept little, because of the dread of the shadow that hedged them round.
But when the dawn came, cold and pale, Aragorn rose at once, and he led the company forth upon the journey of greatest haste and weariness that any among them had known, save he alone. And only his will held them to go on. No other mortal man could have endured it, none but the Dunedain of the north, and with them Gimli the dwarf and Legolas of the elves. They passed Tarlang's Neck and came into Lamadon, and the shadow host pressed behind, and fear went on before them, until they came to Calembel upon Ciril, and the sun went down like blood behind Pinathgelin away in the west behind them. The township and the fords of Ciril they found deserted, for many men had gone away to war, and all that were left fled to the hills at the rumour of the coming of the King of the Dead. But the next day there came no dawn, and the grey company passed on into the darkness of the storm of Mordor, and were lost to mortal sight. But the dead followed them.
Now all roads were running together to the east to meet the coming of war and the onset of the shadow. And even as Pippin stood at the great gate of the city and saw the Prince of Dol Amroth ride with his banners, the King of Rohan came down out of the hills. Day was waning. In the last days of the sun, the riders cast long pointed shadows that went on before them. Darkness had already crept beneath the murmuring fir woods that cloaked the steep mountain sides. The king rode now slowly at the end of the day. Presently the path turned round a huge bare shoulder of rock and plunged into the gloom of soft-sighing trees. Down and down they went in a long winding file. When at last they came to the bottom of the gorge, they found that evening had fallen in the deep places. The sun was gone. Twilight lay upon the waterfalls. All day, far below them, a leaping stream had run down from the high pass behind, cleaving its narrow way between pine-clad walls, and now through a stony gate it flowed out and passed into a wider vale. The riders followed it, and suddenly Harrowdale lay before them, loud with the noise of waters in the evening. There the white Snowbourn, joined by the lesser stream, went rushing, fuming on the stones, down to Edoras and the green hills and the plains. Away to the right, at the head of the great dale, the mighty Starkhorn loomed up above its vast buttresses, swathed in cloud, but its jagged peak, clothed in everlasting snow, gleamed far above the world, blue-shadowed upon the east, red-stained by the sunset in the west. Merry looked out in wonder upon this strange country, of which he had heard many tales upon their long road. It was a skyless world, in which his eye, through dim gulfs of shadowy air, saw only ever-mounting slopes, great walls of stone behind great walls, and frowning precipices wreathed with mist. He sat for a moment half dreaming, listening to the noise of water, the whisper of dark trees, the crack of stone, and the vast waiting silence that brooded behind all sound. He loved mountains, or he had loved the thought of them marching on the edge of stories brought from far away. But now he was borne down by the insupportable weight of Middle-earth. He longed to shut out the immensity in a quiet room by a fire. He was very tired, for though they had ridden slowly, they had ridden with very little rest. Hour after hour for nearly 3 weary days he had jogged up and down over passes and through long dales, and across many streams. Sometimes where the way was broader he had ridden at the king's side, not noticing that many of the riders smiled to see the two together, the Hobbit on his little shaggy grey pony, and the Lord of Rohan on his great white horse. Then he had talked to Theoden, telling him about his home and the doings of the Shire folk, or listening in turn to tales of the Mark and its mighty men of old. But most of the time, especially on this last day, Merry had ridden by himself just behind the king, saying nothing and trying to understand the slow, sonorous speech of Rohan that he heard the men behind him using. It was a language in which there seemed to be many words that he knew, though spoken more richly and strongly than in the Shire. Yet he could not piece the words together. At times, some rider would lift up his clear voice in stirring song, and Merry felt his heart leap, though he did not know what it was about. All the same, he had been lonely, and never more so than now at the day's end. He wondered where in all this strange world Pippin had gone to, and what would become of Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli. Then suddenly, like a cold touch on his heart, he thought of Frodo and Sam.
I'm forgetting them,
He said to himself reproachfully.
and yet they are more important than all the rest of us. And I came to help them, but now they must be hundreds of miles away if they're still alive.
He shivered.
Arrowdale,
Said Eomer.
our journey is almost at an end.
They halted. The paths out of the narrow gorge fell steeply. Only a glimpse, as through a tall window, could be seen the great valley and the gloaming below. A single small light could be seen twinkling by the river.
This journey's over, maybe,
Said Theoden.
but I have far yet to go. Last night the moon was full, and in the morning I shall ride to Edoras to the gathering of the Mark.
But if you would take my counsel, said Eomer in a low voice, you would then return hither until the war is over, lost or won. Theoden smiled.
Nay, my son, or so I will call you. Speak not the soft words of Wormtongue in my old ears.
He drew himself up and looked back at the long line of his men fading into the dusk behind.
Long years in the space of days it seems since I rode west, but never will I lean on a staff again. If the war is lost, what good will be my hiding in the hills? And if it is won, what grief will it be even if I fall, spending my last strength? But we will leave this now. Tonight I will lie in the hold of Dunharrow. One evening of peace at least is left us. Let us ride on!
In the deepening dusk they came down into the valley. Here the Snowbourn flowed near to the western falls of the dale, and soon the path led them to a ford where the shallow waters murmured loudly on the stones. The ford was guarded. As the king approached, many men sprang up out of the shadow of the rocks, and when they saw the king, they cried with glad voices.
Theoden King! Theoden King! The King of the Mark returns!
Then one blew a long call on a horn. It echoed in the valley. Other horns answered it, and lights shone across the river. And suddenly there rose a great chorus of trumpets from high above, sounding from some hollow places, it seemed, that gathered their notes into one voice and sent it rolling and beating on the walls of stone. So the King of the Mark came back victorious out of the west to Dunharrow beneath the feet of the White Mountains. There he found the remaining strength of his people already assembled, for as soon as his coming was known, captains rode to meet him at the ford, bearing messages from Gandalf. Dunhir, chieftain of the folk of Harrowdale, was at their head.
At dawn 3 days ago, Lord,
He said,
Shadowfax came like a wind out of the west to Edoras, and Gandalf brought tidings of your victory to gladden our hearts. But he brought also word from you to hasten the gathering of the riders, and then came the Winged Shadow.
The Winged Shadow.
said Theoden.
We saw it also, but that was in the dead of night before Gandalf left us.
Maybe, Lord, said Dunhir. Yet the same, or another like to it, as a flying darkness in the shape of a monstrous bird, passed over Edoras that morning, and all men were shaken with fear. For it stooped upon Meduseld, and as it came low, almost to the gable, there came a cry that stopped our hearts. Then it was that Gandalf counselled us not to assemble in the fields, but meet you here in the valley under the mountains, and he bade us to kindle no more lights or fires than barest need asked. So it has been done. Gandalf spoke with great authority. We trust that it is as you would wish. Naught has been seen in Harrowdale of these evil things. It is well, said Theoden. I will ride now to the hold, and there before I go to rest I will meet the marshals and captains. Let them come to me as soon as may be. The road now led eastward straight across the valley, which was at first point little more than half a mile in width. Flats and meads and rough grass, grey now in the falling night, lay all about. But in front of the far side of the dale Merry saw a frowning wall, a last outlier of the great roots of the Starkhorn, cloven by the river in ages past. On all the level spaces there was a great concourse of men, some thrown to the roadside, hailing the king and the riders from the west with glad cries. But stretching away into the distance behind, there were ordered rows of tents and booths, and lines of picketed horses, and great store of arms, and piled spears bristling like thickets of newly planted trees. Now all the great assembly was falling into shadow, and yet, though the night chill blew cold from the heights, no lanterns glowed, no fires were lit. Watchmen heavily cloaked paced to and fro. Merry wondered how many riders there were. He could not guess their number in the gathering gloom, but it looked to him like a great army, many thousands strong. While he was peering from side to side, the king's party came up under the looming cliff of the eastern side of the valley. And there suddenly the path began to climb, and Merry looked up in amazement. He was on a road the like of which he had never seen before, a great work of men's hands and years beyond the reach of song. Upwards it wound, coiling like a snake, boring its way across the sheer slope of rock, steep as a stair. It loomed backwards and forwards as it climbed. Up it horses could walk, and wains could be slowly hauled, but no enemy could come that way, except out of the air. It was defended from above. At each turn of the road there were great standing stones that had been carved in the likeness of men. Huge and clumsy-limbed, squatting cross-legged with their stumpy arms folded on fat bellies. Some in the wearing of the years had lost all features, save the dark holes of their eyes that still stared sadly at the passers-by. The riders hardly glanced at them. The Pukelmen, they called them, and heeded them little. No power or terror was left in them, but Merry gazed at them with wonder and a feeling almost of pity, as they loomed up mournfully in the dusk. After a while he looked back and found that he had already climbed some hundreds of feet above the valley, but still far below he could dimly see a winding line of riders crossing the ford and filing along the road towards the camp prepared for them. Only the king and his guard were going up into the hold. At last the king's company came to a sharp brink, and the climbing road passed into a cutting between walls of rock, and so went up a short slope, and out on to a wide upland. The Firienfeld, men called it, a green mountain field of grass and heath, high above the deep-delved courses of the Snowbourn, laid upon the lap of the great mountains behind. The Starkhorn southwards, and northwards the saw-toothed mass of Irenzaga. Between there faced the riders, the grim black wall of the Dwemoberg, the haunted mountain rising out of the deep slopes of somber pines. Dividing the upland into two, there marched a double line of unshaped standing stones that dwindled into the dusk and vanished in the trees. Those who dared to follow that road came soon to the black Dimholt under Dwemoberg, and the menace of the pillar of stone and the yawning shadow of the forbidden door. Such was the dark Dunharrow, the work of long-forgotten men. Their name was lost, and no song or legend remembered it. For what purpose they had made this place as a town or secret temple or a tomb of kings, none could say. Here they laboured in the dark years, before ever a ship came to the western shores, or Gondor of the Dunedain was built. And now they had vanished, and only the old Pukelmen were left.